Hello, Forrester, and welcome to this session on how to use a little bit of neuroscience insights in your demand generation strategy to 3 times your success rate. So, who am I to make such bold claims about your success rates and how we can impact that with neuroscience? I'm Kenda Macdonald. I am the demand generation practice lead here at MarketingProfs. Now, my background is in forensic psychology, and I help businesses understand a little bit about how the brain works and how we can apply that to your marketing and your marketing automation and your demand generation strategies as a result to really see an increase in the success rates. And what we do here at MarketingProfs is we help businesses go through that process and craft amazing automation journeys to really get success rates that they are striving for with their demand generation, to make sure that you have a strategic backbone that underpins all of your strategy. So I wrote the best-selling book, Hack the Buyer Brain, which is all about how we evolve to survive and not to buy stuff online. And I'm going to give you some of those insights that we've had from neuroscience in the last 10 to 15 years, 2 specific little nuggets that are going to help you really understand how to change and adapt your marketing automation to how the brain actually works. And as we're going through this, I know that it's a bold claim to say 3 times your success rate. So we're actually going to be talking about a case study. I'm going to be showing you exactly what we did, give you those little insights and what we gave this global AI ops company who 3 times their success rates from MQL to SQL and those lovely qualified conversations that we're all always reaching for. I'm going to show you what we did as we walk through the process, and I will make sure to give you exactly what we did to that company to make sure that you can take those insights away and apply them to your own demand generation strategy. Now, these guys were a global company. They were AI ops, and they focus on things like retail, the financial markets, transportation, and government. So really big company working in some amazing sectors. And they took away 2 specific insights and put them into 3 different places within their journey to really massively increase their success rates from MQL to SQL, which is one of the hardest nuts to crack sometimes. So one of the very first things that we did is we helped them leverage and understand human behavior. Now, when I say leverage and understand human behavior, I mean this in 2 ways. The first is to understand exactly what the brain is doing when it's making a purchase decision, and how we can go around actually impacting that purchase decision in a positive way. So it's understanding how the brain works. That's the first part of leveraging human behavior. The second part is actually leveraging physical human behavior. So it's understanding that when people interact with different types of content and do different things with your marketing materials, that their behavior is telling you very, very specific things. So it's progressively profiling your audience based on the behavior that is being displayed, and understanding that we want certain types of behavior to be displayed, and therefore we should be crafting our automation and our automation journeys throughout demand generation in a very specific way so that we can flag up those leads that are ready for sales immediately when they are ready for sales. So 2 component parts: understanding the brain and actually understanding the physical behavior that your leads are displaying as they're interacting with your content. The second thing that we do to make sure that you're getting those success rates is to create automation journeys based on a world-class framework. Now, when I say world-class framework, what I mean is an automation framework that we have created that is based on things like lifecycle marketing and an understanding of how the brain works, to really take people through all the way from those acquisition stages through to MQL, through to SQL, and sometimes all the way through to fulfillment. So how do you actually plan that out in your automation process? How do you make sure that you're not sort of got glaring gaps in that process as well? How do you then adapt the process, and how do you automate that in a way that means that it's personalized and helpful and valuable to your audience, as well as enabling you to understand the behavior that your audience is displaying? So that's the second thing that we did. The third thing that we did is we executed this with data-led content. Now, when I say things like data-led content, I do not mean just, doing random acts of content and just throwing content out there in the hope that some of it's going to stick. Rather, it's about understanding the different stages that your audience is going through, and therefore what content is valuable at each of those stages, providing and preempting those sort of behavioral points that you're wanting to put together and adding value through that strategic content. So it's understanding that we can validate that with search volume, we can validate that then with the behavior that people are displaying and the data that is being fed back from your systems. So you're utilizing data at several different levels, from understanding what people actually want want to consume through understanding how they consume it and then utilizing that behavior to trigger the next piece of content. So those are the three component parts that we help them. Understand how the brain works and what behavior means at various different stages, put that into an automation journey, and then create and understand the content that needs to go into that automation journey to give the process life. Now, whenever we are looking at these things, one of the things that we need to come back to as demand generation marketers is remembering that we're reverse engineering things from the point of purchase. Now, in demand generation, it's so easy in what we kind of define as modern demand generation to get really hung up on the fact that we're just creating leads that are MQL to SQL. And after the point that someone is handed off to SQL, to forget about the fact that they exist. And as a result, we very often forget about that point of purchase. And we forget that we're reverse engineering a journey from that. Now, this isn't your fault. We're busy as demand generation marketers. We've got a lot of things on our that are demanding our time and demanding brain capacity all of the time. But it's time to come back to remembering that we are reverse engineering a process and a journey from that point of purchase. And therefore, understanding what goes into a purchase decision is fundamental to the success of our demand generation. So there was a fantastic experiment done by Professor Brian Knudsen and his colleagues at Stanford University. And what they did gave us fantastic insight into how the brain actually goes about purchasing something. And what's going on in here affects how we should be creating our marketing. So they took people and they put them in an fMRI scanner. And in this fMRI scanner, they did some very simple things. The experiment design was beautifully simple. They showed them a product that someone may want to purchase. They showed them the pricing of that product, and then they gave them a button and said, would you purchase this product with this arbitrary amount of money that we've given you? And based on the insights from this, we now understand exactly how people make a purchasing decision. And that insight is powerful in a couple of different ways. So let's take a look at how this worked. So they showed them lots of different products and lots of different services, but the most universal one, the one that we all understand, is chocolates. So they showed them chocolates, and effectively what happened was when people saw a product or a service that they wanted, the brain reward center lit up like a Christmas tree. Now, this is what we expected to see in psychology. We expected to see that when someone wants something, the brain emulates having it. The brain gives us a little bit of a dopamine hit and makes us want to take action to get that thing. So we expected to see this. However, when we saw pricing, this is where the cat got thrown amongst the pigeons and everything got sort of thrown awry. We did not expect to see what actually happened. What we expected to see is we expected to see the prefrontal cortex, the parts of the brain that deal with higher level decision making, to get involved, the logical parts of the brain effectively. We also expected to see some of the emotional centers of the brain activate, the things that deal with emotional validation. This is thanks to some fantastic work that Antonio Damasio did, another neuroscientist, in showing that we cannot make decisions without emotion being involved in the process, because emotion helps us understand whether or not something is good or bad. Now, we expected these two things to sort of be activated when people saw the pricing, and therefore were in the throes of making that decision. Not the case at all. Instead, what happened was the pain centers of the brain activated. Now, this is literally the parts of the brain that are dealing with physical trauma or emotional trauma. So things from stubbing your toe or breaking your arm through to losing a loved one or going through a really bad breakup. That is how the brain understands pricing. Now, the impact of that was quite severe. So effectively, one of the things that we always try and do in marketing is mitigate the amount of pain that people feel. But that's just how we understand pricing. Now, a lot of social psychologists have said that this makes a lot of sense, but at the end of the day, we need to remember that the brain did not evolve to purchase things. It didn't evolve to buy stuff online. It didn't evolve to buy stuff full stop. It evolved to get to the next day in the most efficient way possible. We are hacking our own brains all day, every day to do modern things in modern life. And we need to be really conscious of that. So when the pain activation is happening, social psychologists and evolutionary psychologists have said that makes sense. It's because money is a resource. When you give resources away, you reduce your chances of survival. So therefore, we understand money as a resource that we're giving away, and that's painful to the brain. That is one explanation of it. Whatever the case is, that is precisely how we understand pricing. So we had this reward activation when someone saw the products. We had the pain activation when someone saw pricing. And then people could sit back, the neuroscientists could sit back and go, that person is going to buy and that person is not going to buy, within a very small margin of error and with high statistical validity, based on the relative action between the two systems. And this gave rise to the purchase formula. So the purchase formula is as follows. The net value of a product or a service is equal to the amount of reward activation that the brain has minus the amount of pain activation that the brain has. And what that means is we must have a much higher reward activation than we have pain activation. Now, they noticed that the reward activation had to be positive. So basically the net value and the likelihood of someone purchasing therefore had to have a positive end outcome, and it had to be really high. And herein lies the problem. When we are very often in marketing, in sales and marketing, when we are focusing on helping people make the purchase decision, we try to minimize the amount of pain activation that someone has. And we try to basically go, it's not that expensive compared to the amount of reward that you're going to get. And we focus a lot on trying to mitigate that painful feeling that people have when pricing comes up. We don't really have control over how the brain perceives pain perceives pricing or has certain interactions with money. Because when people grow up, everybody has different relationships with money, and that comes into your pain activation. We have very, very little control over the amount of pain activation that the brain has, and we certainly cannot get rid of it because that's how the brain understands money. Now, this happens across B2B and B2C, so even when people aren't spending their own money, we have to understand money in a certain way, and we understand money through pain activation. So effectively, focusing on pain is the wrong thing to do. We don't have a lot of control over that. What we do have a huge amount of control over is reward activation. So we can increase the amount of reward activation that our consumers and our prospects and our leads have in relation to our products and services. And that is the thing that significantly impacts the purchase formula in our favor. So we focus on the wrong activation all the time in demand generation. So one of the things that we need to be focusing on instead is heightening the position of your brand. So luxury brands have higher reward activation than other brands do. And brands that add value to their consumers' lives are the brands that get the highest amount of reward activation. And this is why it's important to reverse engineer from the point of purchase and to make sure that we are consistently adding value throughout the process. We have a significant amount of impact on that end decision by virtue of the way that we get people to the point of being SQL. So the challenge herein is that value is variable. So it isn't just the case that at the start of the journey, you can add value in exactly the same way. As people go through the purchasing process, what is valuable to them changes significantly along the journey. And so if we want to be really heightening the positioning of your brand and we want to be adding value consistently, we need to understand how to add value at each individual point. And that is what significantly impacts the likelihood of you getting that positive purchase. So how do we add value behaviorally? Well, we have a little bit of insight thanks to a guy called Eugene Schwartz. He created something called the awareness stages. Now, these awareness stages actually perfectly map the general learning process that the brain goes through when it is learning, encoding, and recalling information. I use Eugene Schwartz's variables because they're a little bit more marketing friendly and they were created for marketing. So everybody starts out unaware that they have a problem and that they have a need for a product or service. Now, at this point in time, the thing that is valuable to your audience is helping them with the symptoms that they might be feeling. But unless you have really, really big marketing budgets, and I'm talking you, Nike, and so on and so forth, effectively, focusing at this stage is really, really difficult because the brain isn't actively paying attention because it doesn't have a need and it doesn't have a want. The only time that you can really get involved when someone is unaware that they have a problem or they have an issue that you can be helping with is when people are feeling symptoms of that problem and you can help them understand what those symptoms are. But then there is a catalyst, and suddenly people become problem aware. They realize that they have a problem, that they have an issue. And this is where we can add value significantly. This is the zero moment of truth. This is the point at which people turn to the internet for a little bit of help with their problem and their issue. They want to understand their problem. They want to validate it. They want to understand the width and breadth of the problem that is facing them. And they will go off and they will do a lot of research. Now, the fantastic thing is if you are in B2B, the stages here are very, very protracted and very easy to see. In B2C, the stages are a little bit more slippery, so people will slide through the stages quickly. Whereas in B2B, people can spend months in each of these stages. So in problem aware, there's a lot of research into what our problem is, and we want to understand everything about that problem. As we then transition out of that stage, we become solution aware. We become interested in the things that we can do to solve that problem. Now, at neither of these stages are we necessarily looking to purchase a product or a service. We're information hunting. We're fact finding. So we change our behavior from wanting to understand about that problem through to wanting to understand about how we can solve that problem. And the search behavior significantly changes, and you can see that in search volume. So we then become solution aware. We want to understand how do we solve that, but we're not looking at specific options. We want to understand all the options that are available to us, and we want to explore them really, really fully. As we then start to learn more about all the solutions available to us, we'll start doing something very important. And that is we start to create our own criteria for what suits us as a consumer or what suits us as a business. And that's when we start to become product aware. We start to eliminate solution types and categories, and we start to niche down and focus on individual specific solutions that might help us. And that's when we start to look for specific products that might help us with our problem or service. And again, a significant change in the behavior that is being displayed as we go through that process. And after that, we become most aware. And most aware is where we've created our criteria for what is good for us. And we've validated that. And we're now looking at specific companies. And we're now looking at specific options and specific solutions that are available to us. We're interested in pricing. We might want to reach out to sales and understand how that product or service is going to be delivered to us. Now, as people are going through these stages, what is valuable at each one of these stages is very, very different. And the challenge that we see in demand generation is everybody wants to focus down at the bottom. If you focus down at the bottom, you have very, very little control over how much reward activation the brain is getting. When you come up the stages, not only is it easier to find these people, and there are larger volumes of them, but you are able to take them through each of the stages. You're able to add value strategically, understand what the next step is that they need, and you're therefore able to increase the amount of reward activation that the brain gets in relation to your products and services. So not only does people's behavior tell us where they are by virtue of what they're interacting with, but it also tells us how we can help them, how we can add value, and how we can get them to the next stage so that we can increase that reward activation. So those are the two little insights. Now, what we did for this AI ops company was we gave them a very, very clear automation journey and content plan for those prospective and current customers to really understand what was important to them and how it's split into those individual stages. We then help them understand, okay, for each of those stages, what is the right lead magnets and what is the right kind of follow-up to attract and qualify people as they go through those stages. And then we created high-value content to nurture and take them through the strategic sales process. So we gave them content that would really help with that backbone. And then we created lots of behaviorally aligned triggers to help them understand that when these things are happening, this automation needs to happen and this needs to be triggered off. So that as people were going through the process, it was automated and people were then being given the right information at the right time. And they were only being flagged up to sales when they were displaying the appropriate behavior. So if you want to be similar to this AI ops company and how they utilize their demand generation and the behavior being displayed and the way that the brain worked to significantly increase their conversion rates, you need to bring a little bit of that behavioral understanding in, and you need to spend some time understanding those awareness stages and making sure that you're taking people through things strategically. And this is what gives you focus. It gives you a backbone. It gives you strategic alignment for your demand generation, because a lack of strategy is the lack of focus around strategy is the biggest threat to your demand generation strategy. We want to make sure that you're being enabled through that. Now, If you've got questions about this, do come and see us. We're at booth number 915. And if you're more interested in services and all those other great goodies, then you can go off and check us out and that URL there. But everybody that's here does get a free copy of the book if you come and see us at the booth. And I'm going to be hanging around to answer everybody's questions around your demand generation and how we can bring some of those behavioral elements in to really be helping you succeed with your demand generation and your marketing automation. So you have been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, and hit me with those questions.